Hi, welcome back to Homeschool Peace. I'm Cassandra. Today I'm going to be talking all about Master Books, America's Story 1. In this video today, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts about the curriculum, as well as sharing how it is working for our family. Master Books America's Story 1 is designed for students between 3rd grade and 6th grade. My son is in 3rd grade this year and we're about halfway through this material. This book starts in ancient Americas, goes through your age of exploration to your colonial period, your American Revolution, into the Industrial Revolution, westward expansion, and it stops right before the American Civil War, so right around your 1850s time period. Master Books suggests it takes about 45 minutes to complete a lesson. I would say that's pretty accurate. Sometimes my son can get done with a lesson, say in 30 minutes, but especially if there's extra writing, it could take him more towards the 45 minutes to get done with a lesson. So just keep that in mind when you're sort of budgeting for how much time you would need to complete this. For the amount of lessons, there is 180 scheduled lessons written out already for you, so you know exactly what to teach and what sheets to pick up for the day. The lessons, so we have 5 a day over the 36 weeks. What I really love is there's only 28 chapters in this book. So they've broken up each of the chapters over, say, a week and a half period. And I love that, like, the day before you move into the next chapter, it's almost like a buffer or a makeup day. They have a little day where they can either just work on an extra project or do some extra research or catch up on the material from that chapter they're finishing. And even though I really try not to be a box checker, I sometimes slip back into liking checking the boxes. So I really appreciate that Master Books almost built in some buffer time while going through the lessons. For the material that you need, it's simply this textbook and this book that's called The Teacher's Guide. Now this textbook, I don't really consider it a traditional textbook. It's written very different. It's written almost like a narration. So the author is speaking to you like, let me tell you this story, or let me tell you this really sad story. I can't believe our country could do this to people. Or it's written more like, let's sneak in the back of Independence Hall. Do you see George Washington? What do you see? What do you feel? And there's lots of questions built in where you can stop with your student and discuss, like, what are they thinking and feeling while you're reading it. And I found that my son is very engaged with this book. He enjoys reading it together. It's been a really great fit for us. For the teacher's guide, it says teacher's guide, but I would say it's more of the student workbook pages. So it does have the teacher's information, but this is where you would pull out your worksheets for the day that the student is working on, and that's inside the teacher's guide. So now I'm just going to give you a little bit more thoughts and feedback on the actual textbook itself. America's Story 1 is a faith-based curriculum. Now, when I was first looking for a curriculum for my son, one of the big questions I had was how much of Bible history or church history was going to be inside this material. I have had some experiences with other curriculum that has brought maybe a little too much church history or potentially just too many Bible verses mixed into the lessons. I know that might sound weird because I do appreciate faith-based curriculum, but I do have a set time that we do our Bible time together, and I like to have biblical principles in my curriculum, but I don't want to spend that time when I'm just teaching my child, his first lessons on our American history. I don't want to be pulling out my Bible and reading a lot of different scripture verses. Instead, I want to focus on the facts and details about our American history. And so I feel like this had a really nice balance. It does bring in some faith principles or something about talking about somebody's character. You're talking about how they respect people or the honor that they respect others, or maybe something that they grew up loving God, and because they grew up loving God, you can see this how it sort of played into who they became as an adult and a leader in our government. So those types of principles are built into this material, and so you can feel that mixed through, but it's not like I'm pulling out my Bible every single lesson looking at Bible scripture verses. So I really like that balance. One of the other things that I wasn't quite sure about was how are they going to address Indigenous people as well as the issue on slavery. That is sort of like a hot topic, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't get whitewashed, but I also wanted to make sure it was age appropriate for my young third grader. And I feel, again, right down the middle, I feel it's completely balanced. Because it's that narration style that the author is speaking to you, I love this parts where she really spoke and said, this is a horrible, horrible story I'm going to tell you. And you can't even believe this would happen. And why would our nation do this? Why would our people do this? And this is what happened. And so it's spoken in such a way that, you know, it did impact my son. You could tell he was like thrown off a little and just was like a little emotional over that particular lesson, because I love how the author really spoke in a way to not act like it didn't happen, but make sure that it was age appropriate. And going back to the church history point too, you know, there is a little bit that I like. There was one talking about the Great Awakening. So this was Jonathan Edwards, right before the American Revolution, talking about the revival that happened in our nation, turning the hearts towards God before going into the period of the Revolutionary War. And so something like that may not be mentioned in a secular textbook, but I appreciated it brought in, but it wasn't overly church-based either. And even my son being young, he even made a connection, and he wanted to look up the dates, the birth dates of many of our founding fathers to see, could they have been at that tent meeting? Could they have been impacted by this preacher preaching and turning the hearts towards God? You know, as a young kid, they're growing up in a different atmosphere because of this. Would that have impacted them starting our nation? And I loved that he was even able to make that connection. So again, your biblical principles mixed in, and again, going back to your indigenous people or the issue of slavery, it didn't just whitewash it. It made sure it addressed it. So I feel like both of those questions that I have were handled very well in the material. Each chapter is first scheduled for 2 days that you're just reading from this textbook. So my son and I, we gather some blankets, we cuddle up, I read aloud to him. He loves these days that I just read right from this book. There's discussion questions, pictures we'll look at together, and then the next day we just jump right back in where we left off and finish up the reading for that particular chapter. If you are sort of crunched on time, Master Books does have an audio version of this book that you could consider purchasing. So, you know, maybe you want your child to instead sit with some headphones on, read along with the book while it's reading it to them, and then you're able to, if say other students, you're, you know, able to focus on your other kids while they're still just listening to this book. That might be a good option for you. When they're done with the 2 days, then they move to the workbook pages that are found in this teacher's guide. So I just pull these out for my students. Typically it's one worksheet every single day, and they go through for that, say, week and a half period, finishing up the activity sheets based on what they read about. Now the activity sheets range. Some of them are artwork that they're copying or sketching drawings. Sometimes it's copy work. Sometimes there's puzzles. They're finding words in this textbook. All different activities. I didn't really think it's a standard what I would expect as a workbook, because there's just very different activities and a variety of things that they're able to do in these workbook pages. One of the things they do detail is older students versus younger students. So if you have some older students, you probably would want them to go ahead and do, you know, write a short paragraph about this, write a short letter to someone, go ahead and do those activities. You know, as the parent, you can pick and choose what you want them to do. Whenever it's just some copy work or answering a short question, I will typically have my third grader do that. If it's a long paragraph, you know, maybe it's each chapter, I'll pick one of those to have them do it, and the other ones will do verbally, sort of giving a little bit of a balance so that it's not too heavy of writing for him. The other thing that has worked really well, and this isn't included in the book, this has just been something I've done, is sort of switch the assignment up a little bit. Instead of, you know, write a paragraph or a letter explaining what happened during George Washington's inauguration, instead I asked my student to draw me a comic book strip about the inauguration, and he had a lot of fun with that. Another one would be like, detail Paul Revere's ride, you know, write a letter to a friend telling them what happened during Paul Revere's ride. Instead, I had him sit there and build the whole scene with Legos, and then he sat there and explained the whole thing to me. So everyone knows their kids best, so make sure it works for you. If you have to make a few modifications, do that, but know that there is an age range there between third grade and sixth grade, so pick what works best for your kids from these worksheets. When you're done with the 2 days of the textbook, the worksheets, it ends with a timeline and some timeline figures, so I'm going to show you those next. The material comes with black and white timeline figures. So this being, say, Louisiana Purchase, 1803. So if you just studied this at the end of the lesson, after you've read it, after your students done the workbook pages, they then work on their timeline. And so there's a few different options. The student could cut out, say, Louisiana Purchase timeline figure, and you could create your own timeline book. This could be as simple as getting a workbook or, say, a notebook and just drawing a line in the book and writing some dates at the top of each page to keep track of where this falls in history, because you want your kids to be able to see from that ancient America's timeline and see those dates and those events happening as they're progressing through their material. Another option you could do is to use a wall in your house. You could put some timeline figure dates along a strip in your house on a wall, and then your kid could use tape or sticky tack and tack these to the wall. The option that I use is actually a timeline book. I do have a link below to an option that's a similar option for a timeline book like I have, and it has a date line that runs across in the middle of the book, and the student would go ahead and they would cut out, say, this black and white timeline figure, and they would stick it where it goes along their timeline. I also purchased through Master Books their colored timeline figure pack. It's completely optional if you want to, but it has these really great colored images that tie with the same things that they're learning about. And so my son really does enjoy the colored images. And same thing, you cut them out and they stick them right into their book. The colored pack also comes with these colored date strips as well. So if you are deciding to create your own timeline book and you pick up the timeline pack, you could use these strips to cut out and put along a notebook page. So that's an option too. But what I really love about the timeline books is it just gives them this sense as they're learning about these events that you're going and we're increasing in time, we're increasing in our timeline. They're able to see where does these dates, especially if some things are happening around the same time, how are these dates overlapping as well? And so this timeline book and the timeline figures have been a great addition when finishing up one of these chapters. I hope you enjoyed going through America's Story 1 with me. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. In my next video, I'm going to dig a little deeper into this material and give you a sample lesson going through one of the full chapters and give you a little more close-ups of the actual worksheets and all of the things that are included in one full chapter. So if you're interested in that video, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, so you'll be notified when I do post new content. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you leave those below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.